Trump calls Xi Jinping the king of China. Taiwan scrambles as Chinese jets invade their airspace. And China gets personal on Grindr. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This week's China News Headlines. On Tuesday, President Trump spoke at the National Republican Congressional Committee spring dinner. You know, dinner and a show. What more could you want? His speech hit the usual fan favorites. China has been ruining the country, but it's not really China's fault. It's bad U.S. leadership. Bad previous U.S. leadership, that is. But then he dropped this very unusual anecdote.
I was in China making a speech. President Xi, who is a strong man, I call him king. He said, but I am not king, I am president. I said, no, you're president for life, and therefore you're king. He said, he liked that.
I believe we actually have footage of Xi's response.
Oh, thank you.
Last year, Xi Jinping got term limits removed from the presidency, making him effectively president for life. So he's more than a president, but also not quite a dictator, which is why I like to call him the Presitator. But Trump's story about calling Xi a king shows Trump's unique ability to sound like he might be complimenting you while also possibly trashing you. Does calling him king help or hurt Xi? Hard to say. Xi Jinping is locked in a battle for control of China with a rival political faction tied to former Chinese leader and Toad King Jiang Zemin. One of the weapons Jiang's faction uses against Xi is portraying him like he's trying to become a new emperor. Having the President of the United States call him king and saying that he liked it could put Xi in an awkward position. Does that mean Xi Jinping could be less willing to make a deal with Trump on trade? I have no idea, really. Former Pentagon leaders released this statement, warning of the risks of Chinese 5G. 5G is the future of wireless communication. None of us really know how it works, but we do know it is the future. But if Chinese companies like Huawei are building these networks, that could be a problem. That letter bluntly lays out the risk to national security. It says, as military leaders who have commanded U.S. and allied troops around the world, we have grave concerns about a future where a Chinese-developed 5G network is widely adopted among our allies and partners. Current defense leaders are also warning about Chinese 5G. Ellen Lord, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, recently said Chinese 5G is such a serious issue it could change U.S. alliances on a fundamental level. She said at a conference last week, if our allies and partners go with a Huawei solution, we need to reconsider how we share critical information with them. Specifically, the U.S. is part of what's called the Five Eyes, an intelligence network that also includes Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the UK. But don't worry, it's not like any of them would consider using Huawei. Guys! Of course, you can't totally blame New Zealand and the UK. Well, actually you can. But the problem is the U.S. hasn't developed its own end-to-end 5G service provider. Major U.S. telecom companies have said they won't use Chinese 5G providers like Huawei or ZTE, but they still need to rely on European telecom companies. So the lack of options definitely gives Chinese competitors an advantage. Fortunately, I've come up with an unhackable system of telecommunication. And for email, I have an equally unhackable system. You know how I've been talking about how China plans to invade Taiwan? Well, Chinese fighter jets just flew over the maritime border between the two countries/regions. And so Taiwan scrambled its own jets to confront the Chinese fighters. That's according to this statement from Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is how the world ends, people. Not with a bang, but with a tweet. Now, it hasn't yet been confirmed if the Chinese jets did it intentionally. It's been almost 20 years since the last time that happened. But it does come just a few days after a similar incident near Japan. Japan had to send out its fighters after 4 Chinese bombers flew near, but not quite through, Japanese airspace. But again, it could be unintentional. Maybe Chinese pilots just got lost. because they were using the new Made in China GPS navigation. A Chinese woman was arrested after entering Donald Trump's Florida resort, Mar-a-lago. She was carrying 4 cell phones and a thumb drive infected with malware into Mar-a-lago while Trump was visiting over the weekend. That's according to federal court records. The woman had said she was there to use the pool, but then security wondered why she didn't bring a swimsuit. I mean, I think the 4 cell phones is a bit more suspicious, but maybe they were just curious what she planned to do without a swimsuit. Anyway, when she was questioned by Secret Service, she said she was there for a United Nations friendship event that evening. Turns out, that event did not exist. Which is so weird, because she had been told about it by her friend Charles. You know, Charles. I mean, she only ever spoke to him by text, so there was no way Secret Service could actually learn anything about this Charles guy. But I don't know. Something about the name suggests to me that this Charles guy is in charge. Now, I'm not saying that this woman was a spy, because that seems like a truly incompetent level of spycraft. She might just be a huge Trump groupie who wanted to get close to that beautiful mane of hair. At any rate, she wasn't charged with espionage, just lying to a federal agent and gaining access to a restricted area. And frankly, it's unlikely that the woman ever would have been able to get the malware to an area used by the president, since according to the Secret Service, entering the resort does not permit access to areas used by the president, which require additional security screening. It was almost the perfect plan, except for all the ways it failed. The Trump administration is interested in Grindr, for national security concerns, obviously. Grindr is a popular gay dating app, and it was mysteriously bought by a Chinese company 2 years ago. That's why the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. began investigating Grindr as early as July 2018 because of concerns about the security of sensitive user data collected by the app, which included the HIV status of millions of gay people around the world. For example, the Chinese government could use the HIV status of someone in the U.S. military as blackmail. But how would this information get from Grindr to the Chinese government? Well, once Grindr was taken over by a Chinese company, they got a new chief technology officer, and he was really keen on working with a Chinese state-backed HIV research group. But in an email sent to employees obtained by NBC News, he wanted to make sure people wouldn't say it was about sharing HIV data with the Chinese government. Not that they didn't share data with the government, he just didn't want people to say that. And finally, the U.S. has a drug problem. Drug overdoses are the leading cause of unintentional death in the United States. In fact, it's more than gun homicides and car accidents combined. And guess where a lot of these deadly synthetic drugs are being made?
China!
According to this report by the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, China is the largest source of illicit fentanyl and fentanyl-like substances in the U.S. Trump has been pushing Chinese regulators to go after the source, laboratories inside China. And now it seems like that might happen. China has announced that all variants of fentanyl will be treated as controlled substances. The problem in the past was that drug makers could get around fentanyl bans by just altering the chemical structure of the drug slightly, and then their new drug would technically not be banned. But now, Chinese law will consider all fentanyl-related drugs to be controlled substances. That sounds good, but a drug policy researcher told NPR that the regulations may not be easy to enforce. He said law enforcement would have to take a sample from a facility and eventually analyze whether it's a fentanyl-related structure. Boy, that sounds like a lot of work. Instead of taking a sample, wouldn't it be easier to just take a bribe? Besides, Chinese police are not exactly known for good enforcement. Well, except when arresting dissidents. Then, they're great. And before you go, now is the time when I answer a question from a member of the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army, fans who support the show with $1 or more per episode through the crowdfunding website Patreon. Tyler Fosnot asks, would zoos be obligated to pay the panda fee if American scientists were to clone a panda? If so, what international law binds us to obey China's global panda hegemony? Perhaps we could donate the cloned panda to a zoo in Taiwan. Wouldn't it be worth it just to see the CCP pitch a fit? Tyler, you are perhaps a mad genius. But technically, wouldn't the clone, being genetically identical to its parent, still belong to China? I don't know. Science is making things weird and complicated. But anyway, I can't see any American scientists trying to clone a panda without getting China's permission first. And I can't imagine that permission being given without any further obligations. Panda diplomacy is just too valuable a tool for the Chinese Communist Party. The ultimate in soft, cuddly power. Not that I'd want to cuddle a panda. What am I, the Prime Minister of Canada? But would I personally encourage a scientist to violate the laws of nature and play God just to troll the CCP? I'll have to think about that one. Thanks for your question, Tyler. If you'd like to hear your question answered on the show, sign up to support China Uncensored through the crowdfunding website Patreon. It's less than the cost of your daily cup of coffee. Thanks for watching China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.